Would you please sign my petition?
Okay, I guess that sounds pretty good.
Thanks.
We live in a world where consumer rights have degraded to the point that Disney is trying to argue they can't be sued for the wrongful death of a man's wife in one of their restaurants, all because he had signed up for a Disney Plus trial years prior. That's a real story, I'm not even exaggerating. She had told them her allergy 3 times, and they guaranteed that her food was fine. Now, combine that with Sony removing over 100 TV shows that people had purchased, not rented, on their Sony video libraries, and car companies charging subscriptions for remote locking, heated seats, and even headlights, people have had enough of these blatant anti-consumer practices. So, once again, it's time for gamers to rise up and fix it. This time, through the Stop Killing Games initiative with Ross Scott at the wheel.
Hi, I'm Ross. For the past several months, I've been working on a campaign to stop the destruction of video games. See, most video games work indefinitely, and yeah, that's pretty much it. But more and more are being designed to stop working the second support ends from the publisher. A kill switch, essentially. It's a form of planned obsolescence, where publishers are destroying games they've already sold to you, but keeping your money. And this is all preventable. Some people don't understand that. I've compared this before to studios from a century ago burning their own films after they were done showing them to recover the silver content. And now most films of that era are gone forever. That's very similar to what's happening to video games today. It's just a terrible practice for everyone involved. Now, most of my efforts have gone towards challenging the legality of this practice in various countries, because it's so consumer hostile, it's not clear if what's going on is even legal. That's still ongoing, but now we have a new option, proposing new law, and for the entire European Union. It took months to get put together and processed, but now we have a European Citizens Initiative devoted to halting the destruction of video games. You can read it yourself. This would require publishers to leave games they have sold to customers in a working state at the time of shutdown, without requiring any further connection to them or affiliated parties for the games to function. How they would do this would be up to them.
But it's not only companies that you have to be worried about these days, and that's why I'd like to talk to you about today's sponsor, Aura. In case you didn't hear, National Public Data, a data brokerage company, has gotten hacked, and they announced on August 16th, 2024 that over 2.9 billion records containing people's names, social security numbers, and all those security questions that websites ask you for were all stolen. According to a story from the Los Angeles Times, every American social security number could have been stolen. They say that the best time to start working out was 10 years ago, but the second time to start is today. I think the same is true with your personal information. That's why I partnered up with Aura. Having Aura is like having your own little hound dog that's always looking for your data, such as social security numbers, home address, and phone numbers in places where it shouldn't be, such as the dark web. Aura will even send removal requests on your behalf to data brokers like NPD, so the next time one of these data breaches happen, you won't get caught in the crossfire. They'll even let you know if somebody tried to open up a bank account under your name and offer up to $5 million USD in identity theft insurance, should something go wrong. You can even get a 2-week trial by using my code aura.com/audentum to get 2 weeks for free and see just what's already on the internet. Like Ross said, the main goal of the initiative is to leave video games in a playable state after the developer is done with them. Something that was never a problem until now. And Ross is honestly one of the best people to talk about this. If you didn't know, he was one of the first machinima directors out there making a show called Civil Protection that came out back in November of 2006. That predates Arby and the Chief by over a year for reference. Along with other machinimas such as Freeman's Mind, Ross has been reviewing games on his show Ross's Game Dungeon in a way that only he can.
Oh yeah, in the future I'ma bust a cap in your ass, yo. Then I'ma go gel my hair.
While this may be called Stop Killing Video Games, it honestly goes so much further than that, because this is probably the best way to prevent this from getting any worse than it already is consumer-wise moving forward when it comes to physical products such as cars, phones, and more. This is where a game called The Crew comes in. It required an always online connection to the internet in order to play. The game had a fully playable single-player campaign with a multiplayer feature similar to Dark Souls, where you could run into other players in the game world, except instead of them being phantoms, they were actually interactable. Well, in 2018, Ross would review this game and talked about this fact and how eventually when the servers were shut down, nobody would be able to play the game again.
And this system is all made possible because this is an online-only game that relies on a central server. Uh-oh. I'm not a fan of that. Okay, I know I've pulled this trick on you before, but at the time of this video, this game is not being shut down, and it's not happening next week or anything. But we'll get to that later. Oh! Online-only gameplay, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to remind everyone, this is an online-only game. And this totally had nothing to do with this video being late. Okay, so, Alright, well, with the magic of editing, let's resume. Yes, this game is going to die. It relies on a central server, and neither Ubisoft nor Ivory Tower have made any statement regarding an end-of-life plan. So without divine intervention, in the future, you're never going to be able to play this game. Now, how long do you have? Well, at the time of this video, The Crew 2 is just released, so there's no way they're going to shut it down this year. That would be a little too bold. Now, this is tricky to calculate, but we can make some educated guesses. The only non-free-to-play game I know of that Ubisoft has currently killed 100% has been Shadowbane. That lasted 6 years before going down. However, Ubisoft had a crapload of online multiplayer shutdowns last year. The longest running one being 7 years, I think. So if we want to be generous and say 8, that puts the Crew's current lifespan at anywhere from 1 to 4 years. And my maximum estimate, I believe that will be the longest online support of any game Ubisoft has published so far. Shadowbane didn't make it to 7 years even with a petition. You know, once upon a time, a company dropping support didn't mean the game stopped working. All it meant was they dropped support. You had to troubleshoot it yourself. Boy, I'd love to go back to that model. And they are going to kill this game. In 2016, less than 2 years after release, they gave away this game for free for everyone who grabbed it. Then they did it again later that year. That is not something you do with a high-status, well-performing game. Now, I was a sucker. I bought a copy for 12 bucks. I didn't expect them to just give it away for free. Some people ask me why I care so much about dead games. This is why. I saw this coming. I knew eventually it was going to affect a game I really cared about. And now it's just a matter of time. I consider it a gaming tragedy to make something with so much effort and content behind it, only to intentionally kill it so no one will ever play it again.
Rostradamus even made a video talking about how scummy this was when the servers for the game were actually shut down, and how people should have been told when this was going to happen when they purchased the game, as well as coming up with a few ideas for the initiative back in January.
So that means starting April, the game will be completely unplayable for everyone who bought it. Now, I predicted this when I made a video on The Crew a few years back, though I got my timing wrong. I thought this was going to happen by 2022. At the time, Ubisoft only had one major game death that I could recall, and that was for an MMO with a subscription fee, so a little bit different situation. I was basing my time estimate on about how often EA had been shutting down their games, and padded it a little bit. Electronic Arts has been on average a lot faster with their game shutdowns, though they've slowed down in recent years. I think. I can't keep track of all these shutdowns now. As a quick refresher, The Crew is an amazing yet frustrating game in my eyes. It's still one of the largest open-world driving games ever made. Let's say the number of active players is low. So? That's irrelevant. They took money in exchange for a product with a perpetual license. That means it doesn't expire. If Ubisoft doesn't want people to keep playing their games, then they shouldn't have sold them. Or they should have sold them under a subscription license, which mandates exactly when the play period ends. Don't lose sight of that. Another comment I saw was people saying how piracy will save us. Well, sometimes, but not for games as a service. That's kind of the problem. The Crew has never been pirated by anyone. Games that never get pirated tend to die. So the people saying that are just confused, I guess.
Ubisoft didn't know it, but from that moment, Ross had set a trap for them that only they could have sprung. That's because The Crew, made by Ubisoft, is a company that's based in France, and France has some of the best consumer laws out there, and Ross would even reference this in his review back in 2018.
You know, the Statue of Liberty is a gift from France and is still one of the most iconic monuments of America. I want to say The Crew is another national treasure from France. But you know what? France didn't take the statue back and dismantle it.
To Ross, The Crew being shut down was the perfect opportunity to use for the initiative, and when he saw it, he activated his trap card.
But like, where did the initiative start for you? I know you've sort of mentioned The Crew a couple times, but was it more of a straw that broke the camel's back thing, or was it like, this is just a good opportunity to do this?
It was definitely, it's almost like, I was thinking of like a dam breaking, but not like a straw breaking camel's back, but more like, you know, in games when you're just waiting to ambush somebody at one spot,
yeah,
you might be there for a couple minutes and then they're like, okay, go. It was like that. Like, I've been waiting for some opportunity to take action on this, and nothing seemed quite right. And The Crew was kind of like the planets aligning, because it was a big game. So not the biggest, but big enough so that there were a lot of people who still had receipts for it. But the most important thing was it was published by Ubisoft, which is located in France, which means they're subject to all kinds of laws U.S. companies aren't. So that made it just kind of the perfect target. It's a coincidence that I also like the game. I mean, I would have done this for any big game that hit all the criteria. But yeah, okay, I guess to run through it quick.
To make things short, the plan essentially is to get this passed in the EU because customer rights are generally much more respected there, with cases like Apple having to allow alternative app stores on the iOS platform. One of the better known cases being Epic being allowed to bring Fortnite back onto the platform. This is important because in many cases, once a precedent is made in one country, it'll likely follow into others. Similar how to when the EU said that all handheld devices needed to start using USB cables by 2024, Apple made it so all their devices worldwide used it. I mention Apple because Right to Repair legend and consumer rights activist Louis Rossman would also make a video about the initiative, giving it the signal boost that it needed.
This is where I'm going to get to the part of the video that's going to be very, very unpopular, because I'm going to start talking about the M word. Not the N word, the M word. M as in Mary, just, I don't get taken out of context there. The M word really pisses people off, and that's the word called money. What Mr. Ross Scott is trying to do here is he wants to create an initiative where people can vote on this and try to get legislative change. And he's trying to do it in the EU. So this over here is a European Citizens Initiative. By the way, if I'm getting any of this wrong, I'm familiar with the legislative process in the US. I know nothing about it in Europe. If I get anything wrong here, please do let me know. I will pin your comments. I'm okay with criticism being corrected when I'm completely wrong, and I'm probably going to be wrong on some of this stuff because I don't understand EU politics or the legislative process. From what I understand here, if he gets 1 million signatures on this particular thing, what happens is EU legislators that actually care about, or at least pretend to care about the citizens, will look it over. And after looking it over, the legislative body will decide on whether or not they want there to be a law or a rule initiated that would be enforced at the government level, which would mean that if this passed, if it gets 1 million signatures and the legislature, after noticing it got 1 million signatures, decides to move forward with it, that would mean that companies like Ubisoft, if they want to sell their video video games in Europe, they would need, if you want to enter that market, you have to make it so that that video game is playable if you want to stop supporting the server into the future.
Ross would actually comment on that video giving his thanks, as well as saying why he doesn't see monetary donations as helping him. Thanks for the kind words. The more exposure the ECI gets, the better, even if you're not eligible, like me. We all get the benefits if it passes, so the more EU citizens that hear about this, the better our odds. As for the money thing, it's more that I don't see an obvious application where it changes the dynamic much, internationally, except for Australia, which I did spend money on. I could raise 100k, and it probably wouldn't change the plan much at all, so I don't want to take people's money just to waste it. I need to actually believe it gets us somewhere. At the moment, I don't see that significantly compared to systems that are already in place, but we'll see what emerges. You're operating in the USA where you can't do anything without money to influence law. This is playing under different rules. Louis Rossman's channel has about 2 million subscribers, and I would absolutely recommend checking him out. So everyone who heard about this seemed to think it was a pretty reasonable idea. If you buy a video game, you should be able to play it whenever you want to. I mean, it's like the angry video game nerd said.
Now, what's the most important aspect about any game? Well, being able to fucking play it.
Ross was getting what felt like nothing but support, and how could he not, advocating for laws ensuring that customers get to keep the games that they buy in a playable state, the same way people who buy a DVD can keep watching their movies. Seems like a pretty reasonable thing, right? Well, it is, unless you're Thor from Pirate Software. Pirate Software, or as he prefers to be called, Thor, is a Twitch streamer that got big on YouTube through shorts, who claims to have 20 years of experience in the world of video games. That is, if you consider a few of those years modeling furry avatars on Second Life.
What are we talking about? The Stop Killing Games initiative. Yeah. What is this? Thank God I've had a few of my own subs ask me to stop to promote Stop Killing Games, and it's hard to explain that it's the legal equivalent of using a nail bomb to take out a wasp's nest. That's exactly what it is, dude. That's the biggest issue. But here's the thing. They're proposing this, and I hope it doesn't go through, because what they're doing is too vague and dangerous.
But even though he was anti-Stop Killing Games, he was able to give a pretty accurate rundown of what's being asked for.
The Stop Killing Games initiatives is basically, we don't want single-player games to have DRM that the developers can turn off and thus render the single-player games inactive anymore. This is what they want to change. The way that they're going about it is using very vague language that makes it so that even live service games could be caught in this net, which means every multiplayer game gets caught in the net.
Yes, that's correct. Multiplayer games need to be playable after the developer and publisher are done with them. Before we go any further, I just want to discuss this, comparing two games from the same series and the same publisher, Call of Duty Warzone and Black Ops 1. Black Ops 1 came out on November 9th, 2010 on the Xbox 360, PS3, PC, and the Wii. The Wii was discontinued in 2013, while the PS3 and 360 were discontinued in 2016 and 2017 retrospectively. The game was not free and sold 25 million copies between all these platforms. It also was not cross-platform, meaning that if I had it on the Xbox 360 and you had it on the PlayStation 3, there was no way for us to play together online. Warzone, on the other hand, released in March of 2020, and you know what? It was free. It was also downloaded by 100 million people. featured crossplay, and was playable on the PS4, Xbox One, PC, PS5, Xbox Series S, and X consoles. Which one do you think has the higher player count right now? That's right, Black Ops 1 on the Xbox 360 alone has more players than Warzone has right now. That's because there's nobody playing Warzone in 2024, all because the servers were shut down. The game is just gone and replaced with what most people believe is a worse version. That's because Warzone 2, or just Warzone as they're trying to call it now, was only downloaded 25 million times. And from a consumer perspective, why would anyone download it after what happened with Warzone 1, where everybody lost their stuff? If you weren't aware, Warzone 1 had a shop and a battle pass. In the shop, you could buy different characters to play as, different weapons, character skins, and more. And the battle pass, should you choose to buy it, it was the same. When Warzone 2 came out, however, nothing transferred over, and I've heard people try to justify it saying, how often do skins transfer over to another game? Well, in this case, Modern Warfare 2 skins, characters, and weapons were brought into Modern Warfare 3 the next year through what they called Carry Forward. You can still use some Warzone items in-game, but it's regulated to Modern Warfare 2019, Black Ops Cold War, and the terrible Call of Duty Vanguard, aka different games. If you really want to compare this to Black Ops 1 on the Xbox 360, first off, I can still play the game, but even if I was going to get rid of the single player to make it more in line with Warzone, it's still fully playable. I was able to get in matches on Team Deathmatch and Zombies no problem. I was even able to play some of the DLC maps that cut the player base down even more. Going even further back, I was able to play Call of Duty 4 and World at War just fine. This 17-year-old game lasted longer than the most popular Call of Duty of all time. Going back to Thor, however, he said that he had a problem with the initiative because, as he said, it made no sense. But when he found out that Ross was the head of it, he showed his true colors.
Stop Killing Games comes from the guy, live service is a scam. This is not based on vagueness. It is their intention to have all games to be updated to be single player, even if it was an MMO originally. Do you have a source for that information for me? Because I'm going to be real with you. If that's the case, all of this can eat shit then. I drop the mask entirely. I have no qualms about that. If the intention is to turn all live service games into single player games, they can eat my entire ass. The whole thing. So if you have a source for that, I'd love to see it. Yeah. Be great.
Yeah, a 5-year-old video from Ross was enough to trigger him. All because Ross has been consistent throughout the years that he doesn't want video games to die. Throughout the video, Thor literally ignored everything said in the initiative's video, and even though it was clearly stated how games like World of Warcraft would be exempt, because they tell you right from the bat that your playtime only lasts as long as you play the $15 a month, Thor just ignored it. Oh yeah, and because Ross said that he thought it would be easier to pass this initiative in the European Union, Thor thought that he could somehow take a moral high ground.
God, this is bad.
You know how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it? And finally, this is a diversion from really serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
So you're socially engineering politicians that don't know anything about the subject matter to try and push through an initiative about an industry you clearly don't understand to stop killing video games in a way that would kill all live service games. Am I getting that right? I feel like I'm getting that right.
And fun fact, Thor has been in previous dramas with people like MatPat of all people. All because when MatPat streamed Thor's game, he didn't put enough hashtags in the metadata. I'm not even joking. Meanwhile, Ross has been nothing but both true and honest in all of his time on the internet, in all of the right ways. So, after this was brought to his attention, Ross would respond to the live stream by commenting on the video, asking if Thor would be interested in discussing this with him. Hi, this is Ross, the guy in the video you responded to at 10:24:00. Based on your response, I think there's a combination of a values clash, and there's a misunderstanding on how much we're asking for. For example, World of Warcraft would likely be exempt from the measure, since it's considered under the laws as a true service. In other words, the customer is told explicitly when their access ends at the time of payment. Most live service games do not do this, which could run afoul of European Union law. There were many other misunderstandings in your video. It's clear you hate the initiative, and I doubt I would change that, but I would encourage you to at least hate it for what it accurately is. We obviously have very different perceptions of the likely outcome of this. I think those details influence that. That said, we also have a values clash. You state repeatedly that a game being permanently disabled is not a problem. That is where we clearly disagree. You're actually the most high-profile person I know to be adamantly against what we're doing. If you're interested, I would be fine with having a discussion with you on this where we could at least clarify things, but your choice. So, did Thor respond agreeing or turning down the invite to talk? Well, he more so reacted to it, aka deleting Ross's comment. He also took down the stream, claiming that it was getting a lot of racist comments, and then responded on a stream as disingenuous as you can possibly get.
It is specifically this portion of your video, right here, where you discuss reasons why your initiative could pass. And your description of this, I find to be disgusting.
Politicians like easy wins, and this doesn't require them to do much at all. And unless it involves gambling or protecting children, politicians generally don't care about video games. So this isn't of big consequence to them or most of their constituencies. EU law is already unclear on a lot of this practice anyway, and we would be making it easy for them to settle it. It falls in line with other consumer practices. You know, how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it? And finally, this is a diversion from really serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
So politicians are going to put this forward because it's an easy win, they don't understand the subject matter, and it's a diversion from more serious issues. I don't have any respect for that. And I don't have any reason to have a conversation with you because of this.
Thor's ego got hit, and he ended up DFEing everything related to this and posted 2 videos going into detail about this much more humbly than the smug, anti-consumer practice man we saw earlier. I will say this, however, he did end up coming to a middle ground that I can start to agree with. Companies need to make it clear that you're not buying a game prior to money being exchanged.
In the case that a studio is making a live service game and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game. I think that we should be fighting about that. That needs to go away. A player should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license, not buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license, to protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be better informed to the player at time of purchase.
What I won't say is a good point, however, was him trying to explain that because Lizard Squad hackers could hack into a game to the point that developers give up, people shouldn't be allowed to make their own servers.
Under this initiative, you would have to release the server binaries or keep the game in a functional playable state at end of life. So I hit you with a ton of bots. I hit you with a ton of exploits. I attack your community. I destroy your Reddit. I go after your business. I go everywhere that I possibly can to make this cost as much as it possibly can for you. And it's not hard to do this. We saw the exact same thing happen in TF2 recently. The massive amount of bots that were attacking the game. This is not infeasible. This is something that is very easily attainable today. And let's say that this goes on long enough that your game dies because you can't afford it anymore, and your studio has to shut down. At end of life, you now have to release those server binaries to keep the game in a functional playable state. How many of you have felt negatively when an MMO dies? Or when a live service game dies? Oh, dead game. There's only 5 people online. Why would I play that? So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me. You want to take down these live service games, put them up on a private server, and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense. That's not preservation. And for those that may stop there and go, but private servers going to have a lot of players. Look at all the ones for World of Warcraft. Again, we talked about that. It opens up a route for abuse of the developers. So that is not a solution.
Well, our man, Ross Scott, wouldn't respond to this criticism because he's a busy man. But Louis Rossman would, and he made the main point that it's more important for the consumer who buys the game to be able to play it than the developer getting to make these kinds of decisions.
Now, when it comes to live service gaming, there is this thing with advertising. If you're advertising a game as $5 a month, you are paying for this game as a service. You're paying $5 a month for the game. It runs on our server. We can shut this down at a given point in time, and once we shut it down, we will no longer charge you money. That's an honest transaction right there. And even if I don't like that model very much, I can respect the truth in advertising that exists here. The problem that I have is with a different type of live service game, where it is not sold as a live service game. It is sold as a game that you purchase. Something like The Crew, from what I see, and to be clear, I'm kind of ignorant here because I'm not really into the whole live service game thing. It doesn't look like this was sold as a live service game. It was sold in a manner where I, as a consumer who's not really hyper into the modern gaming community, would imagine that what I was purchasing was a game that I can continue to play single player without ever having to think about Ubisoft shutting down something into the future. If I bought that game, I would expect that I could continue playing it. So for me, it's not even necessarily about single player versus multiplayer. It's about how it was sold. If you sold the game as a purchase, that's different than you selling a rent leased service where it's $5 a month. I know at the end of the month I have to pay. If I don't pay at the end of the month, I don't get the game. And if you shut down the server, which you're allowed to do at any given time, I will not be billed anymore. There's a difference in the honesty there. And I think a lot of the problem that consumers have is not necessarily the concept of live service games versus games that are fully local. I think the problem that a lot of consumers have is the complete lack of honesty in the way that this is sold, which is something that it does need to be addressed. When it comes to licensing agreement, there's certain software that Thor mentioned that he may not even have a license to allow you to have. The license that he gets from whoever he's getting the code from or the rights. I told you guys I was out of it. The rights to the trademarks for. This may be a license that he has as a dev, or he has, but he can't give that to you. The developer of the game may want to renew that license after 5 years if the game is still doing well. So if the game is not doing well, they shut off the server. But if the game is selling like hotcakes, they may decide that they want to renew that license. So they don't really want to pigeonhole themselves into a box by putting in the advertising materials, this game will not work on this date in 2028. Because if the game is still selling, they may want to continue having it work. And I understand that idea that the manufacturer wants to have that freedom into the future. However, so do the people who bought the fucking game. If I bought this game, I don't really care about your licensing agreements for the code. I don't care about your licensing agreements for any of this stuff because back in the day, we didn't have to care. When you bought a game like Gran Turismo 2 on your PlayStation 1, you didn't have to worry about any of this. And there was no worry about licensing. All the cars in that game, a lot of them were real cars. Whatever licensing they worked out with any of the manufacturers of those cars, whatever license it was a license where I could continue to play Gran Turismo 2 today in my PlayStation 1.
In case you didn't know, Louis Rossman is a pretty big channel. He has about 2 million subs. But then, another channel about 7 times his size would come out supporting the initiative. And that man was Linus Tech Tips, urging his audience to let Europeans know about the initiative.
Okay, why don't we do another topic? Luke, do you want to pick one?
Sure.
Yeah, hopefully, something. How about some good news?
Can the EU save video games?
Ooh, yeah, this is exciting.
A few weeks ago, the EU registered Stop Destroying Video Games as a citizens' initiative. a petition that EU citizens can go sign onto if they want an official response from the EU government. The initiative is part of Ross Scott's Stop Killing Games movement, and it aims to prevent publishers from remotely rendering games unplayable when they decide to discontinue support. This week, the petition opened for online signatures. Its organizers will have a year to collect at least 1 million signatures, which I'm fairly sure they will do, but they'll only do so if you go sign it, so please do so right now. They will also have to hit a minimum number of signatures from citizens within 7 EU countries. All 1 million signatures can't just come from one country, for example. However, these thresholds are relatively low. Like
I'm posting the link in all the various chats everywhere where people watch the WAN show. Now is a really good time if you are a citizen of any of these places to head over there and register. This is kind of important. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, no, it's not that important, but as gamers, if we want to have any chance of preserving the gaming experiences that we're having right now before they all just get sunset by the developers or maybe more likely the publishers, you got to get on this because this is the most momentum we've ever had by a country mile.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I dropped links in all the chats, guys. Do what you can to spread the word. Like if you know even one person in Bulgaria, get them to register, to issue a statement of support. It'll help a bit, which is all we can really hope for.
Now, tell me if you've heard this one before. Gamers want to be left alone and play their video games. Meanwhile, a group of people on the outside try to gaslight them for it. Well, in this case, Thor's friend, Theo Rants, would make a video that I can only describe as groveling to Thor, and saying that gamers are entitled because they want to play the games that they purchased.
I also need to disclose a bias. I am friends with Thor, so you need to know that going in. Every word of what he said is almost like surreal in how correct it is, and the fact that people are still trying to poke holes in it, it deeply irks me. I'm genuinely pissed at the level of entitlement that I'm seeing from gamers. The big difference between how Thor feels and how I feel is that I'm not scared to blast y'all. I am not scared to say the truth, the reality that the average gamer, not the average person who plays games, but the average person who sees gaming as a huge part of their identity, that person is an entitled asshole. Just straight up. And it sucks. It genuinely sucks because game devs are pouring their lives into creative works that are life-changing.
Oh, and you want to know how I know that this guy does not believe a word that came out of his mouth? Because he made multiple videos on Adobe complaining about their pricing model, saying it's toxic and should be illegal.
Their payment models are incredibly toxic. The fact that they have a monthly plan that isn't actually monthly and charges you like $100+ fee to cancel. What? They're doing stuff that's so crazy it feels like it should be illegal.
How entitled can you get, am I right? Before we go any further, I want to make sure you know how bad Adobe was getting. They updated their terms of service saying that they had the right to use whatever you made for whatever purpose they wanted. And unless you agreed to their terms of service, you were locked out of whatever you were working on. Even Thor said this was not okay.
And if we go to the terms of service and we go down to section 4.2 in the Adobe terms of service, licenses to your content solely for the purposes of operating or improving the services and software, which could be generative AI, but isn't explicitly stated. We don't know. That's a problem. You grant us a non-exclusive, worldwide, royalty-free, sub-licensable license to use, reproduce, publicly display, distribute, modify, create derivative works based on, publicly perform, and translate the content. That shit is not okay. That's the part that's a problem, chat. This whole thing of like, oh, they're definitely using it for generative AI. You don't have proof of that, but you do have proof of this.
Adobe Suite is clearly a service that you pay for monthly. And in the EULA, they say they can lock you out for any reason. But you know what? Enough about these naysayers, because Ross would then make a big FAQ video where he said how simple the whole thing is, starting out by saying how people that just say they want the initiative to fail without offering any sort of compromise or alternative are just haters and don't need to be listened to.
Always ask, what's the alternative? I don't know if I've communicated this well, but I'm actually in favor of any solution that solves the problem of video games being destroyed. So when I hear criticisms of our plan, my first thought is always, what's the alternative solution that saves video games? If somebody has an alternate solution, cool, we're on the same team. Then we're just discussing tactics. But if somebody does not have an alternate solution, but they're against our solution, well then they're against all solutions. So deductively, that means they are in favor of perpetuating the destruction of games, which means they're the opposition. In which case, we don't really value their critique because they don't want to solve the problem. Like if a parent says to a kid, clean your room, I don't care how you do it, and the kid says no, well, then the parent might clean the room for the kid and throw out some stuff they didn't want them to because the kid refused to solve the problem. So anything about our plans you don't like, I encourage everyone to ask, what's the alternative? It's a fast way to figure out who's on what side. And some people may not even realize that's their stance until they go through that process. I mean, they might have good intentions, but good intentions and no action, what does that get you? Most of what we're doing is about future games. For existing games, don't worry, we'll get to that. But the point is, this campaign is focused on games that don't even exist yet. So when I see comments saying what we're asking for is impossible or we don't know what we're talking about, what I hear is somebody saying it is impossible or impractical to make an online game in the future with an end-of-life plan. Now, I and many developers I've talked to think that's a pretty silly statement, but I've seen so many comments along those lines. I think a few out there have an almost myopic focus on games right now and how things can't change, and that's not where our focus is.
Ross explained how he believes this is something that can spread throughout the world and how important it is to stop it from going to cars and medical equipment.
Most of these games, you buy them as a one-time purchase with no stated expiration date. Well, that part sounds like a good, but they rely on an external service, which you're given no time frame when it ends. They just say it can end at any time. Well, you might not even need to imagine for some things. Imagine applying that to others. Actually, I think with some cars, they have heated seats that depend on a service where you have to dial in order for that to work.
Yeah.
Well, what if that was your car engine that starts working like that?
Yeah.
Or, let's see, I've given examples like maybe medical devices or farm equipment or education tools. Things that we start getting out of the realm of video games, which are ultimately not that big a deal, but this stuff could be really important. And you're I almost think of video games as just almost like a laboratory to see what companies can get away with. Because if they can run it here, then they can, let's say, move it to, again, something like cars or vehicles. They can disable elements of it that you used to have automatically when you bought a car, and then they can point to video games. So saying, well, there's a long history of setting things up so that we can disable things via kill switch remotely, So
yeah,
this is very much a consumer rights issue just across the board. That's not actually where my motivation comes from on it, but that's 100% where almost all our openings in the law on it are.
Ultimately, Ross feels that if the initiative keeps its pace, it's going to get the signatures needed, and that he's done his absolute best to make sure that it's going to pass. And as for me, recording this on August 24th, the initiative has over 300,000 signatures from eligible Europeans and is at 31% of its needed threshold. Unfortunately, I don't live in Europe, so I can't sign the main petition as much as I would like to. But on the Stop Killing Games website, there are alternatives for the United States, Canada, Brazil, United Kingdom, and even Australia. And if you watched all the way through and think that it's just about video games, this goes so much further. When I grew up, if you bought a TV, as soon as you hooked it up, you could do whatever you liked with it for as long as you wanted. Sure, a lot of TVs got hit when they stopped broadcasting signals for the old school bunny ears TVs, but you can still use the TV. And there are TVs nowadays that won't even work unless you agree to a licensing agreement saying they have the rights to sell your data, advertise to you, and in some cases have access to your camera and microphone on your TV. While playing What Ifs can definitely get a little out there, The Crew was sold as a physical product in stores that had an always online internet requirement. People like Thor and Theo called people entitled for wanting to continue playing their games. But what if the product was a TV instead that just bricked itself and said, "Thanks for watching," with an ad and a QR code for the next model? I have a funny feeling that these same people wouldn't be saying, "Oh, but you don't understand. LG only licensed the power supply for 10 years. They had to kill your TV." And really, that goes for anything. I'm definitely biased because I've been both an avid connoisseur and feral junkie when it comes to video games. But it doesn't take a genius to see that this is a problem, and unless it's dealt with now, this is only going to get worse when it goes into cars, medical equipment, cell phones, and more. If you go through all of my videos, you won't find one at the end where I ask you to like and subscribe. But in this one, I will actually ask that you go and sign the petition if you can. I'll even leave a link in the description for you. And if you live in a country where you can't do anything, just help spread the word. This is probably the most important petition when it comes to defining the concept of ownership that we've ever had. But that's it for this one. I got a boogie trial to get back to. As always, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you soon. But wait, what's this? The lolcow trading card game has just gotten a little more advanced. Not in its rules, but now adding in brand new lore for all your favorite cows and scribes. Including yours truly. Adentum is a robotic scribe that spends all his time documenting all the lolcows of the digital and real world. Throughout many years of experience, this has prepared him for anything the lolcows may throw his way. Adentum is also a battle-hardened warrior that has many machinations at his disposal. Since he is the robot overlord, Adentum can construct more robots to do his bidding. The scribes have a powerful ally in this master of machines. The Acronian War is approaching, and Adentum is waiting. If you're interested in getting in on the action, or even want to test your luck by donning one of the Sonichu medallion shirts, check out my affiliate link down below.